with. So let's start with this one.
All right.
Hold on. There we go.
A butthead, dude.
I also think it's hilarious how in this video when Paige clipped it, she left in it me calling him a butthead because I feel like it was so fitting.
Yeah.
Because he was being a butthead.
He'll just bark.
Yep. Well, nobody pushes the envelope, obviously. You know, when he's barking like he was when he came in, nobody's going to be going up and petting him or anything like that by any means. Where you see right now, he probably would have rather just got away from me and he went hid by you or something like that. But because I'm not allowing him to do that, he's escalating. Because he's learned that barking, growling makes people go away. So wait a minute, barking, growling isn't working right now. So now I need to resort to biting, right? I need to resort to doing other things. A butthead, dude.
Okay. So, simple video. So what was the point of highlighting this video? One, it was to show obviously where this dog was starting with things.
Yep.
So obviously he was starting aggressive, right? He learned, like I said, I can't talk today. Biting, barking, lunging, growling makes people go away,
Yep.
right? So I've said this 8 million times when working with dogs like this, right? Well, you see this comment right here. You're forcing the dog into a state of aggression, right? The dog was aggressive to begin with, right?
Yeah.
All I did was I did the trigger. That is a very reasonable trigger, which is I need to be able to touch this dog. And that did, in fact, I triggered the dog into a state of aggression in that moment, right? But it's like, we have to work past the me being able to touch this dog.
Yeah.
Right? This dog was coming in for a board and train. I needed to be able to collar this dog. I needed to be able to leash this dog. I needed for my staff to be able to safely handle this dog. In order for that to happen, I have to be able to touch the dog. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the common theme you guys are going to see as we watch some of these videos and talk about some of these videos is just the way society is shifting in this direction of everything has to be of choice to the dog, right? The dog has to be okay with anything it is that you are doing if you want to do it to them. And I don't mean the dog has to tolerate it. I mean, you have to ask the dog permission and constantly work with the dog's threshold and never go past it for everything.
Yeah.
That is not real life. What happens when you do that? Let's say we avoid all these problems. I was highlighting in this video also because I was putting my hand on this dog and the dog was reacting, obviously.
Yeah.
And I wasn't stopping. I was taking away the reinforcement behind the behavior. The dog then doubled down on the behavior, intensified the behavior because he's like, wait a minute, this usually works. So maybe if I try a little bit harder, maybe it ultimately will work.
Yeah.
We call this, in dog training, call this an extinction burst, right? So what an extinction burst is when a behavior typically accomplishes a desired result, but it's no longer accessing the reinforcement that the dog is trying to access. They will double down on and intensify the reaction prior to the behavior extinguishing, right?
Last ditch effort.
Last ditch effort. Let me try twice as hard. Let me give it my all this time just to see if it works. And then once they finally realize even through that it doesn't work, then the behavior will then subside.
Yep.
Some like to call this learned helplessness. The difference that I always describe in the case of learned helplessness versus like an extinction burst in a case like this is that learned helplessness is a dog needing to forever tolerate a truly aversive experience and realizing that there is no escape from said aversive experience, right? So let's say I was doing something that actually was like painful to this dog, right? And it's like, you know, because right now he has a perceived fear that I'm going to do something really scary to him. And yes, that means that the lead up to it is aversive in the moment. Like me reaching down and petting him is aversive to him, but it's only aversive because of what he thinks may happen, right? So by putting him in that situation and teaching him to tolerate that aversive thing in the short term, right? What happens is in the long term, we get him used to and desensitize him to that initial aversive experience. You know what I'm saying? You following along here?
Hit me that again. So
okay. So this dog has a fear of something aversive happening.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say in the past, people pet him, right? And that petting leads to, you know, him getting poked at the vet.
Okay.
Right. Or getting, his ear cleaned out, or he is cutting his nails and cutting it too short,
Okay.
or whatever it may be. Right. Let's use nail trimming. It's the most clear example. Right. Dogs inherently don't necessarily have an aversion to having their paws touched, but if repetition, touching the paw leads to cutting a nail too short and it becoming painful through classical conditioning. The touching of the paw becomes aversive because of his fear of what it might turn into.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think that's the most clear way that I can describe it, obviously. Right? So as we work through it, because I know there's nothing inherently aversive about me touching the paw, it's just the connection and the classically conditioned response of what that has led to in the past. The only way to get past it is by showing him through repetition that touching the paw does not, in fact, lead to that. Right?
Okay,
So in the short term, yes, it is an aversive experience to the dog. But in the long term, as he realizes that aversive experience does not lead to the truly aversive experience, it becomes desensitized to that. And then you could work past it.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes 100%
So the dog is
sense.
proactively exhibiting self-preservation. Right? They're not exhibiting self-preservation to a truly aversive thing happening. They are proactively exhibiting that self-preservation. Right? So that is the difference between what we're doing here or something like learned helplessness. Right? Learned helplessness, you could argue that there is a short, and this is where you get like really nitpicky with the science of things, because you could initially say, sure, because still technically petting this dog is aversive until that's been further desensitized, right? It is him going into a state of learned helplessness initially, but then as he realizes that it's not actually aversive, that goes away, right? You could rebuild that positive association with that thing, and the short-term ramifications are really not that big of a deal in the long run. Where if I was putting him into a state where I was grabbing his paw, cutting the nail too short, and doing that over and over and over again, and there was no escape from it, that is learned helplessness, because forever he's tolerating something that is painful, that is truly aversive, that will never become not aversive. Right?
100%.
And that is obviously not what you want, right?
Yeah.
So whatever. So this is a video that I used to kind of highlight that. Like I said, I picked this one first here because, one, it's the first video on our TikTok. It's pinned to the top, obviously. And two, I think it highlights a lot of the issue that we're going to see moving forward, which is that this dog doesn't like being pet, so we should just never pet the dog, right? And it's okay that something as simple as you petting the dog triggers such an aggressive response. People are too on the side of the dog with this kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, how else are you supposed to get them into a better spot? If you have to, have to break it down.
Well, the only alternative is what people refer to as counter conditioning, right? Or like slow desensitization, which is you find the dog's threshold, because his threshold to start biting is probably somewhere between me going towards him and me actually touching him. Okay. You get what I'm saying? That's the threshold is somewhere on that line. So we figure out where the threshold is. Let's say it's when I get halfway to him with my hand, right? That is the threshold where he starts reacting. I would go just before that and repeatedly do that while conditioning that with a positive association, and then stretching that threshold out until eventually I can get all the way to petting the dog. Here's the problem with that. Problem number one, I have never in my life seen somebody with a dog as intense as a lot of the dogs that we work with successfully do that. I don't believe it's possible to really get that good with your classical conditioning where you could do that. With some minor things, I'm sure you could, right? But with a lot of serious behavioral issues, there ain't no fucking way. And two, it still caters to the emotion of the dog has started liking it, which is why the dog is not biting anymore. But you've not addressed what, they say, address the root of the problem. The root of the problem to me is from the human standpoint. When the dog doesn't like something, the dog resorts to aggression. Right? That is setting yourself up for such failure, it's not even funny. Because, you may have solved it in this moment because you've taught the dog to like or tolerate that, right? And you've addressed the root of the cause of that exact incident. But what happens when in the future the dog experiences something that it doesn't like again.
Yeah.
And because you've not addressed the actual root of the problem, which is when they don't like something, they act out in this manner.
Yeah.
You run back into the exact same situation, and then you have a liability on your hands still because you've never taught the dog when you don't like something, you still cannot do this.
Yeah.
Right? That is the biggest problem with it. And that's why I hate when people push you haven't addressed the root of the problem and the counter conditioning and this and that, because you're just still catering around the dog.
Yeah.
You are learning to live completely around the dog. Right?
Sure.